So this is a reading of Samuel Adams, The Natural Rights of the Colonists as Men. Sam Adams, let's see, in the 1760s, Samuel Adams, 1722 to 1803, emerged as a key leader of Boston's radicals, although his second cousin John Adams described him as a zealot, ardent, and keen in his defense of America's liberties. Royal Governor Tom Hutchinson, 1711 to 1780, doubted whether there's a greater incendiary in the king's dominion or a man of greater malignity of heart. A greater incendiary in the king's dominion or a man greater malignity of heart. So let's get to reading first. The Natural Rights of the Colonists as Men. This is Samuel Adams. Among the natural rights of the colonists are these. First, a right to life. Secondly, to liberty. Third, to property, together with the right to support and defend them in the best manner they can. These are evident branches of, rather than deductions from, the duty of self-preservation, commonly called the first law of nature. The first law of nature. Is this Hobbes? Is that what we're talking about? So, just to recap what we just read, we have three rights. The right to life, liberty, and property. Well, shit, that's John Locke's definition, is life, liberty, and property. In the Declaration of Independence, it was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All men have a right to remain in a state of nature as long as they please, and in case of intolerable oppression, civil or religious, to leave the society they belong to and to enter into another. So we could stay in the state of nature. We could stay in the state of nature for as long as we please. We can consent to be a part of a society, and we can leave one society for another society. We can leave one society for another society. We can go back to the state of nature. We get to choose. When men enter into society, it is by voluntary consent. It's by voluntary consent. So you had the state of nature. You want to be in this society. It's because you consent. And they have a right to demand and insist upon the performance of such conditions and previous limitations as form an equitable original compact. Every natural right not expressly given up or from the nature of a social compact necessarily ceded remains. Alexander Hamilton said the U.S. Constitution is a Bill of Rights. It is a Bill of Rights all by itself. Every natural right not expressly given up or from the nature of a social compact necessarily remains. Meaning, if you join a society and they say, don't do this, A, B, C, and D, you still have a right to speak. Until they pass a law saying you don't have a right to speak, that comes from nature. You have a right to life and liberty and property. You have a right to life, liberty, and property. That comes from the state of nature. And what is natural law? It's the law of rational man. So it's man in a jungle, but man using his rational faculties. And when he's in the jungle, well, he has a right to life. He has a right to freely go about his day, and he's got a right to property. And this is his tree, his coconut. And every natural right not expressly given up or from the nature of a social compact necessarily ceded remains. All positive and civil laws should conform as far as possible to the law of natural reason and equity. As neither reason requires nor religion permits the contrary, every living man in or out of a state of civil society has a right peaceably and quietly to worship God according to the dictates of his conscience. Just and true liberty, equal and impartial liberty in matters spiritual and temporal is a thing that all men are clearly entitled to by the eternal and immutable laws of God and nature, as well as by the law of nations and all well-grounded municipal laws, which must have their foundation in the former. In regard to religion, mutual toleration and the different professions thereof is what all good and candid minds in all ages have ever practiced, and both by precept and example inculcated on mankind. It is now generally agreed among Christians that this spirit of toleration, in the fullest extent consistent with the being of civil society, is the chief characteristic mark of the true church. And insomuch that Mr. Locke has asserted and proved beyond the possibility of contradiction on any solid ground that such toleration ought to be extended to all whose doctrines are not subversive of society, the only sex which he thinks ought to be, and which by all wise laws are excluded from such toleration, are those who teach doctrines subversive of the civil government under which they live. The Roman Catholics or Papists are excluded by reason of such doctrines as these, that princes excommunicated may be deposed, and those they call heretics may be destroyed without mercy. Besides, they're recognizing the Pope in so absolute a manner in subversion of government by introducing as far as possible into the states under whose protection they enjoy life, liberty, and property, that solecism in politics, imperium in imperio, leading directly to the worst anarchy and confusion, civil discord, war, and bloodshed. The natural liberty of men by entering into society is abridged or restrained so far only as is necessary for the great end of society, the best good of the whole. So when it comes to natural rights versus constitutional rights, there's people that don't even know about constitutional rights. I've heard a white woman actually say that the laws don't apply to her. The reason why the Constitution is so beautiful and wonderful, the Constitution doesn't just say don't do A, B, C, and D, right? Don't do, crimes, don't hurt people, don't life, liberty, property. So don't hurt property, don't hurt life, don't hurt liberties. That comes from the state of nature, so that's already there. But if everybody has a right to anything and everything, well, it's just going to be a war of everybody versus everybody. That's what Hobbes says. And so we join in a civil society in order to maintain our civil liberties. So our right to speak, our right to petition, our right to peacefully assemble, these are protected in America, theoretically, because they're the law. And it's the constitutional law, which means it's the main law, it's the foundational law. And why is that important? Well, in the state of nature, you don't just have a right to life, liberty, and property. You kind of have a right to anything and everything, everywhere. Anything, everything, everywhere. So, everybody, you have a right to pretty much everything. Is there a right to everything? Does this right to everything even exist, says Jean-Jacques Rousseau? So in order to make sure we're all not just fighting against each other because that person has a right to everything, that person has a right to everything, and everybody's got a right to everything. Instead, we say, no, there's actually some things you don't have a right to. You don't have a right to another person's life, liberty, or their property. You have a right to your own life, liberty, and property. You have a right to speak. You have a right to peacefully assemble, and you have a right to petition. Not only are those common sense, but it's the law. So you're giving up your right to everything, but you got the right to petition. You have a right to peacefully assemble. You got the right to speak. If men through fear, fraud, or mistake should in terms renounce and give up any essential natural right, the eternal law of reason and the great end of society would absolutely vacate such renunciation. The right to freedom being the gift of God Almighty, it is not in the power of man to alienate this gift and voluntarily become a slave. So they're kind of saying that even if a person says, yeah, I'll give away all my freedoms and I'll be a slave, they say that you've actually agreed to something absurd. You agreed to something that is not beneficial to you. The rights of the colonists as Christians. So, do I want to read all this? Yeah, let's read all of it. Okay, so you heard Donald say he's not a Christian. He clearly said not a Christian. He's shaking his head no, and he pointed to himself. I love you, Christians. I'm not a Christian, but I love you, Christians. And that didn't make any headlines at all, which is incredible because how many fucking Christians are up this motherfucker's ass? They won't vote for the Christian people, but they'll vote for some asshole who says that he loves Christians. The rights of the colonists as Christians. These may be best understood by reading and carefully studying the institutes of the great lawgiver and the head of the Christian church, which are to be found clearly written and promulgated in the New Testament. So we're talking about Jesus here, not the Torah, not the Old Testament, but Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And there's actually a couple other revelations, right, and some other things. By the act of the British Parliament, commonly called the Toleration Act, every subject in England except Papists, etc., was restored to and reestablished in his natural right to worship God according to the dictates of his own conscience. And by the charter of this province it is granted, ordained, and established as an original right that there shall be liberty of conscience allowed in the worship of God to all Christians except Papists. Magna Carta itself is in substance but a constrained declaration or proclamation and promulgation in the name of Lord in the name of king, lords, and commons of the sense the latter had of their original inherent and indefeasible natural rights, as also those of free citizens equally perdurable with the other. That great author, that great jurist, and even that court writer, Mr. Justice Blackstone, holds that this recognition was justly obtained by King John, sword in hand. That's the Magna Carta. That's the Magna Carta, King John. And peradventure, it must be one day, sword in hand, again rescued and preserved from total destruction and oblivion. Peradventure, what does peradventure mean? There's a couple words there. Peradventure is uncertainty or doubt as to whether something is the case. So in peradventure, it must be one day, sword in hand, again rescued and preserved from total destruction and oblivion. He also said perdurable. What's all these per words? Perdurable. That's enduring continuously, imperishable. So perdurable, it's durable, durable, durable. And peradventure is uncertainty or doubt as whether something, I don't know about that. Peradventure, I'm not as wealthy as he has. So maybe or maybe so. Promulgation. What's this? Promulgation. It's probably just to. Okay, no, it's a formal proclamation. A promulgation is the formal proclamation or the declaration that a new statutory or administrative law is enacted after its final approval. In some jurisdiction, this additional step is necessary before the law can take effect. Okay, so by the act of the British Parliament, commonly called, we already did this. So now the rights of the colonists as subjects. Couple more sentences. A commonwealth or state is a body politic or civil society of men united together to promote their mutual safety and prosperity by means of their union. The absolute rights of Englishmen and all freemen in or out of civil society are principally personal security, personal liberty, and private property. All persons born in the British American colonies are by the laws of God and nature and by the common law of England, exclusive of all charters from the crown, well entitled, and by the acts of British Parliament are declared to be entitled to all the natural, essential, inherent, and inseparable rights, liberties, and privileges of subjects born in Great Britain or within the realm. Among those rights are the following, which no man or body of man consistently with their own rights as men and citizens or members of society can for themselves give up or take away from others. First, the first fundamental positive law of all commonwealths or states is the establishing of the legislative power. And the first fundamental natural law also, which is to govern even the legislative power itself, is the preservation of the society. Secondly, the legislative has no right to absolute arbitrary power over the lives and fortunes of the people, nor can mortals assume a prerogative not only too high for men but for angels, and therefore reserved for the exercise of the deity alone. The legislative cannot justly assume to itself a power to rule by extempore arbitrary decrees, but it is bound to see that justice is dispensed and that the rights of the subjects be decided by promulgated standing and known laws and authorized independent judges. That is, independent as far as possible of prince or people. There shall be one rule of justice for rich and poor, for the favorite in court and the countryman at the plow. Thirdly, the supreme power cannot justly take from any man any part of his property without his consent in person or by his representative. These are some of the first principles of natural law and justice, and the great barriers of all free states and of the British Constitution in particular. It is utterly irreconcilable to these principles and to many other fundamental maxims of the common law, common sense, and reason, that a British House of Commons should have a right at pleasure to give and grant the property of the colonist, that these colonists are well entitled to all the essential rights, liberties, and privileges of men and freemen born in Britain is manifest not only from the colony charter but acts of the British Parliament. Now, what liberty can there be where property is taken away without consent? Can it be said with any color of truth and justice that this continent of 3,000 miles in length and of a breadth as yet unexplored, in which there are 5 millions of people, has the least voice, vote, or influence in the decisions of the British Parliament? Have they altogether any more right or power to return a single number to that House of Commons, who have not inadvertently but deliberately assumed the power to dispose of their lives, liberties, and properties, than to choose an emperor of China? Had the colonists a right to return members to the British Parliament, it would only be hurtful, as from their local situation and circumstances it is impossible that they should be ever truly and properly represented there. The inhabitants of this country, in all probability, in a few years will be more numerous than those of Great Britain and Ireland together. Yet it is absurdly expected by the promoters of the present measures that these, with their posterity to all generations, should be easy, while their property shall be disposed of by a House of Commons at 3,000 miles distant from them, and who cannot be supposed to have the least care or concern for their real interest, who have not only no natural care for their interest, but must be in effect bribed against it, as every burden they lay on the colonists is so much saved or gained to themselves. Hitherto, many of the colonists have been free from quit rents, but if the breath of a British House of Commons can originate an act for taking away all our money, our lands will go next or be subject to rack rents from haughty and relentless landlords who will ride at ease while we are trodden in the dirt. The colonists have been branded with the odious names of traitors and rebels, only for complaining of their grievances. Oh, you're complaining? Well, then you're a traitor and a rebel. But, this shit sucks. Oh, you damn rebel. What's a quit rent? It says quit rent is an annual fee based on acreage paid by a landowner to the person, a colony's proprietor, or the king or queen, or the heir of the person who originally granted title to the land. So it's a tax. Quit rent is a tax, an annual tax based upon the acreage paid by a landowner to the king or queen, or the colony's proprietor, or the heir of the person who originally granted title to the land. I'll give you title to the land, but you got to pay me rent. And rack rent is an excessively high quit rent. Well, that's not a quit rent. That's a damn rack rent. So let's read this sentence again. Hitherto, many of the colonists have been free from quit rents. Many of the colonists have been free from taxes, land taxes, but if the breath of a British House of Commons can originate an act for taking away all our money, our lands will go next or be subject to rack rents from haughty and relentless landlords who will ride at ease while we are trodden in the dirt. So not only are they going to get a tax from us, the landlords, right, the one who originally titled the land, but they're going to do rack rents. No, you don't just pay me a penny tax. You don't just pay $100 worth of taxes. You pay me $500 a month. So, interesting that the colonists were free from quit rents. And then if the British House of Commons can originate an act for taking away all of our money, well, we're going to take all your money away. Well, shit. They're going to take the lands and the properties and everything else too. So, promulgation is the formal proclamation or the declaration that a new statutory administrative law is enacted after its final approval. In some jurisdictions, this additional step is necessary before the law can take effect. Per durable, enduring, continuously imperishable, and per adventure. Uncertainty or doubt as to whether something is the case. And that is The Rights of the Colonists by Samuel Adams. There's two more biography things here. It's no surprise that Hutchinson possessed a negative opinion of Samuel Adams, beginning with the Stamp Act crisis and continuing with colonist resistance to the Townshend Acts and efforts to propagandize the Boston Massacre. Adams had been a thorn in Hutchinson's side. By 1772, the issue was who should pay royal official salaries. Adams perceived that whoever held the purse strings would be able to use these officials as puppets. So did Hutchinson and his English allies, who in 1768 arranged for part of Hutchinson's salary to be paid from the proceeds of customs revenues. In 1770, Great Britain added tea tax as a source of Hutchinson's income. 2 years later, it directed that Superior Court judges be paid from these sources as well. Adams insisted that the Massachusetts Assembly, which answered to voters, should compensate these judges in order to maintain its leverage over them. The controversy allowed Adams to promote the town of Boston to appoint a committee of correspondence that would produce a broad statement of colonist rights. The resultant document drafted primarily by Adams, helps to underscore the importance to American revolutionaries of the ideas of John Locke, who justified England's glorious revolution by arguing that ousted King James II had failed to uphold the government's obligation to protect individuals' fundamental rights to life, liberty, and property. Robert M.S. McDonald.